When it comes to designing your website and creating your marketing materials in general, an often overlooked or perhaps underutilized aspect is the fonts. That is, what does the text look like in your written materials, your website, and other branded materials? In this video, we're going to talk about how to choose a really good font or font pairing for your website and marketing materials. So to start off, let's talk terminology because there are different types of fonts, some of which can be put into certain buckets. Some of the most common terms you're going to hear when it comes to fonts are serif versus sans serif. What do these mean? So serif fonts are fonts that have extra ornamental or elaborate curlies on the end or different things that make them look a little more fancy. That's my layman's term description. So sans serif means without those extra things. These are more basic fonts like Arial or Roboto, for example. On top of those, you also have script fonts, which are more the fancy handwritten or cursive looking fonts as well. So those are some of the basic types you'll hear about, and in this video we're going to talk about how those might influence what you want to choose. So when it comes to picking the right font or combination of fonts for your website and marketing materials, the first thing you want to think about and ground those font selections in is what is the brand you're going for? What's the voice or tone or persona you want to evoke and communicate through your font selection? For example, do you want to have a more traditional, old-fashioned, or authoritative vibe or persona? In that case, you might want to go for more traditional serif fonts like Times Roman, for example. If you're by comparison wanting a more simple, more trendy, perhaps more techy look and feel, you might lean more towards a sans serif font like a Leto or an Arial, for example. Or if you want something more personalized, more fancy, more whimsical, you might lean more towards script fonts. Overall, though, what you want are fonts that are easy to read, size up and down really well, look good on computers and mobile devices, as well as in print, because you're going to be using these fonts all over the place. Ideally, what you're looking for is one primary font that you can use for text. So this is the bulk of written material, so paragraphs and longer pieces of text. You want something obviously that's very easy to read. But then secondarily, you want some sort of more fancy, more bold, more elaborate, or more ornate font that can be a secondary font for headers, for larger text, things that really create more of a unique brand for you. Because by comparison, the text you'll have in paragraphs is going to be probably more run-of-the-mill, more typical. Really, that other font you use for headers, for maybe your logo, for example, is going to be what really helps stick out and create a brand for you. For example, for Coca-Cola, think about their script text in the Coca-Cola logo, just as an example. So with that said, let's get into tactics. How do you go about choosing the right font? Well, to start off, there are all sorts of fonts. If you use Microsoft Office like myself when you first started learning computers, you're probably familiar with Times Roman, Arial, fonts like that. Those are still viable options. But with your website, some really important things to think about are what fonts are going to, one, load really fast, because that's really important both for Google rankings as well as user experience. And then second, what fonts will you be able to generate across any browser, across any device, because some fonts work better than others. A really good source for finding fonts that work really well on the web is Google, actually. Google Fonts is a great and really robust repository of free fonts that work really well for websites. If you want to head over to the Google Fonts website, it's actually in a nerdy way kind of fun to play around with because you can toggle on different types of fonts, different sizes. You can type in different types of specific text and see how that looks. It's a really good resource just to dive in and see what fonts you might like. If you just dive right into Google Fonts though, there is a lot of fonts and it can be pretty overwhelming potentially. A more efficient route, in my mind, is getting some inspiration. And if you've watched other videos of Buddies, you probably know that Google is a resource we use a lot. So if you want to Google examples of Google font pairings or great Google font pairing examples or things like that, you'll find a lot of websites that will give you examples of pairs of fonts that work really well together. And usually you'll be able to find a sans serif font or something really simple that works really well for text and text paragraphs, as well as a more fancy, more ornate, more bold font that works really well for headers, logos, things like that. So that's a really good way to go about getting some design inspiration for what fonts look really well together. And keep in mind, a little bit of art and a little bit of science goes into this. you don't want to just arbitrarily pick two fonts. There's some little bit of artistic nuance in what fonts just naturally look really good together. So it is important and helpful, especially as a novice trying to create good font pairings, to use design reference points of what are good suggested font pairings. And typically, if you do enough searching, you'll be able to land on some examples that look really good and will help articulate the right brand messaging and personas that you want to create for your own brand. That said, let me give you a couple other tips for finding some really good fonts. So let's say you see a logo or some sort of image with a font you really like, and you want to say, well, what font is that? Well, you might guess this, but what I'm going to suggest actually is Googling, what font is that? What you'll find in Google results are typically a handful of websites where you can actually upload an image, and the website will scan that photo and tell you what font that is or similar fonts to it as well. So it's a really cool way to either grab a snapshot or an image, or basically find some font, if you're not sure what it is, to quickly find out what Google font or other fonts that might be. A second tool actually in Google is if you're on a website, you can look at the code behind the scenes and see what font that website is using. So for example, if you're pulling up a website and have a font that you like and want to see what that is, you can in Chrome, in the Chrome browser, click on the text, right click, and when the menu pops up, hit inspect. What this will do is generate the code and some of the CSS of how that website is built. If you just look on the right side and scroll down to font family, you'll be able to see what fonts were used in that website. And then to verify, just to make sure, you can then Google, for example, if the website says it's Times New Roman or Leto, for example, you can just Google that font directly and make sure it pulls up the font that you think it is and verify that's what you want. So along with picking the actual fonts or font families, there's other things you can do too to really personalize or edit or adjust the fonts. Think about the size of the font, the spacing, the kerning, which is how much space is in between letters. There's lots of different ways to play around with those for logos, for text in general, for headers, to really customize the font and the look and feel that's going to be right for you and your brand. So there you have it, a real quick and dirty guide on how to pick really good fonts, how to find out what fonts are amongst pictures or images or websites you like and might want to use for inspiration. And of course, as I usually say on a lot of these videos, Google is your friend. Google things like good font pairings, use Google Fonts, use those tools to figure out what combinations are going to look really good and evoke the right emotions for your brand too. You don't need to start from scratch. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of resources out there to help give you inspiration, as well as real direct advice on what fonts look really good together as well. So as mentioned earlier, picking the right fonts and right font combinations is a little bit art and science. So if we can be a resource for you here at Buddy, we're more than happy to do so and have a conversation, no pressure, no obligation. If there's a chance that we could work with you on a project for your website or other graphic design or branding materials, that's something we do quite a bit for clients. So we're more than happy to chat and see if we could be a good fit for you. If you'd like to learn more about our team at Buddy, you can visit our website at www.buddywdd.com. And if you'd like to get in touch, just click on that button in the upper right-hand corner, answer a few real quick questions, and we'll be happy to follow up right away to get a conversation scheduled. So as always, hope this has been helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you again real soon.